Okay, so today a bit of a different video, more of a history lesson on Soviet science, specifically on Soviet genetics, which I've been learning a lot about recently, and how it essentially collapsed in the middle of the 1900s as a result of one man called Lysenko, who was an agronomist who essentially fabricated a lot of his results for about 20 years. I don't think it's a super well-known fact. I mean, I certainly didn't know it until I did the research for this video. But Russia in the 1800s and early 1900s was one of the world leaders in science, like probably one of the best 5 countries in the world to be doing science. They had made so many amazing discoveries, had so many amazing scientists like Ivanovsky, who in 1892 discovered viruses in plants. They had two scientists who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine, Pavlov in 1904 and then Mechnikov in 1908. And then in the 1920s, you had Cheverikov, who essentially managed to align Darwin's theories around natural selection with genetic science. There are 2 scientists in particular that are really important for this story today, Nikolai Koltsov and Nikolai Vavilov. Koltsov was the one who essentially hypothesized the chromosome. He suggested that there were like these double-stranded molecules that kind of built up the inheritance machinery of humans. And this was confirmed later on, 26 years later, by Watson and Crick. So really foresighted there. Vavilov was a proper agricultural scientist, so he had traveled to like 60 different countries, collecting different seeds with the hope of finding the one seed or like the right group of seeds that could help feed the Russian people. He ran an institute with thousands of staff that later got banned by the government. And very sadly, both of these scientists died as a result of Lysenko. The story of how this happened is actually nowhere near a laboratory initially. It's when in 1928, Stalin collectivizes agriculture, which essentially means that farms were forced together. Any farmers who didn't comply were either sent into exile or killed. And as a result of that, the farming sector essentially collapsed and many different varieties of crops were just lost. Then in 1931, as a response to this, the leadership issued a decree saying, we need scientists to grow high yield crops that can be done in 4 to 5 years. Now, Vavilov knew that this was near impossible, especially on the scale that the Communist Party wanted. He said this, no one listened to him, but then someone jumped in who said, yeah, you know what, it is possible. And that person was Lysenko. Lysenko was an agronomist from a peasant family. So he wasn't a trained scientist, but he kind of knew some of the practical elements of farming, supposedly. And that actually worked in his favor for the Communist Party because they were trying to purge the elite, the academics, the bourgeoisie, so to speak. And having a peasant farmer who could also speak science was ideal for them. Lysenko had this theory around vernalization, which is like verbalization but with an N, and it essentially involves soaking seeds in water and then when they're cold putting them into the soil. Supposedly that meant that you could modify more of their development and the offspring after them would also inherit those changes. Vavilov actually backed him early on, and so no one thought that Lysenko was some kind of crank or pseudoscientist. Like, he had the backing of arguably the most important famous geneticist in Russia at the time, and so the government also were on the side. The issue is they then tested it and it didn't work, and Lysenko kept saying it's gonna work. It didn't. The thing that really fascinated me when I was reading this was how Lysenko got away with it for so long, and he essentially did 2 very cunning and evil things, which is that firstly, he didn't have any control arms. So in like a standard clinical trial, in any kind of experiment, right, you want the main thing you're studying and then the control group. I'm going to give this drug to the treatment group and then I'm going to have the control group that doesn't receive a drug and we can compare the difference. Lysenko had no such control arm for what he was saying. He then did another evil thing, which is he sent a questionnaire to all the farmers who were using his methods, asking them how it was going. The issue was that if your crops weren't going well, you would get prosecuted by the Russian government for it. So none of the farmers ever said the crops were going badly. And so what Lysenko had essentially was this glitch where he could be like, yeah, look at my experiments, they're going amazingly because there's no comparators. And look at all the other farmers who are using my methods, they love it. And so the government couldn't call him out on anything, no one could prove him wrong. He just pointed to the evidence that was available and said, look at how great it's going. The party also wanted Lysenko's theories to be true because it fit with their vision of what science should be. And specifically that meant, like, in the same way that changing the environment could change a plant, they believe the same kind of thing for humans. A person is almost like a blank slate. You can change the environment and you can make this person into whoever you want them to be. Genetics said the opposite of that, right? That like certain characteristics are fixed at birth. Lysenko also said that members of a species would always cooperate with each other rather than compete with each other. Again, contrary to what Darwin was saying around natural selection and competition, Lysenko was the other direction, and that again fit with more of the communist model of everyone is equal, there's no hierarchy, no competition. I think this gets to the crux of the issue, right? Because it wasn't just one man lying, it was a man lying in the direction that the state wanted, and that's why no one ever ended up stopping him. By 1938, he was running the Agricultural Academy. By 1940, he got hold of Vavilov's Institute. But you see, the thing is, right, like obviously, if your crop yields aren't working, you're going to get found out. By 1946, having not returned what he promised, he had started to lose a lot of support. And so he did this kind of like wild Hail Mary swing in 1948, told Stalin this outrageous promise of, I've got a new idea, it's going to revolutionize everything. Stalin believed him. And then in August of that same year, they went to the Academy of Agricultural Sciences, gave a big speech and signed a decree saying that all of genetics was banned. The costs of this were very serious. Vavilov was arrested and interrogated hundreds of times to give up names of other scientists he was working with. He got sentenced to death and then sent to prison. His sentence actually got changed to 25 years, but no one ever told him, and he ended up starving to death in 1943. Koltsov died the same year in 1940. Official reports say he died of a stroke, but later evidence suggests it was actually a poisoning. Many other scientists from that era, some from those interrogations of Vavilov, were arrested, exiled, often killed. A very brave scientist called Efroimson in 1941 actually wrote up a 200-page report talking about why Lysenko's ideas were garbage and weren't true. Very bravely sent it directly to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, was arrested immediately and sent to a labor camp until 1955. And it had this very peculiar second order effect on Russian science in that once all of these academics were either exiled or killed, thousands of spaces opened up, but no true academics wanted to fill it. What ended up happening was many uneducated people who were socially savvy, status hungry, power hungry, ended up filling in the spots and educating the next generation of scientists. And that simply meant that the quality of Russian science plummeted over the next few decades, and I don't think ever truly recovered. It's even worse, right? Because I focused on genetic science here and to some extent biological science, but it affected so many different areas of academia. Soil scientists, statisticians, historians, sociologists, philosophers, many of their places got taken up and were never truly replaced by other academics. You know, like going over this video, I've been struggling to figure out what the lesson is, because the original paper, it framed it as authoritarianism is bad for science, essentially, is what kind of killed Soviet genetics. And 100% that is true. Huge factor. But I think there's a little bit of nuance there in that, like, just before the Bolsheviks and the communists came in, Russia was still an authoritarian country, right? It was under this absolutist czarist monarchy, you know, secret police, censorship, the whole lot. And even then Russian science could be great. And even during that communist time, even during the time of Lysenko, you had amazing Russian scientists in mathematics and in physics that led to them developing the nuclear bomb. Right? It was when it was designated towards a very specific mission that they couldn't afford to fail, they could still divert the right resources and allow proper development of science. The other interesting thing is that what Lysenko was saying about vernalization is not like completely absurd. I think it's actually a really interesting hypothesis as long as you test it properly. You know, in the past 20 to 30 years, the field of epigenetics has grown massively, and that is the field that talks about how during the lifetime of a human, that person can inherit certain changes to their DNA, not to the extent that Lysenko was saying, but they can inherit certain changes, and those changes can be passed down to the offspring. The real issue with what Lysenko was saying is that he didn't allow his theories to be tested properly and fairly. Science is very messy, and that storytelling that we do is very malleable. We're constantly reshaping our scientific story. Science doesn't progress very well when you have this kind of predefined structure, especially one that comes from a broader political theory. What helps science is going in without any kind of preconceptions as best as you can. It helps to have some theory and some hypothesis for sure, based on your experience and your intuition, but to be very open about where that science leads to, I think is important. And I think there are a few things I took away from reading this paper and like surrounding research I did, which is that authoritarianism generally is terrible for science. The one good thing it does, which is that it can divert a lot of resources to a problem, is not native to authoritarianism. It can happen in a democracy. It's happening right now in democracies around the world. But a lot of money does help. It just needs to be put through the lens of, we allow dissenting opinions, we allow contrarianism, but we always make sure to test the hypotheses, those contrarian hypotheses, properly and fairly. And so that's the one thing I want you to take away from this, is that money helps, but contrarianism tested properly is even more important.